I was dead. Not just in the way that stops a heartbeat, but in the way that shatters everything you thought you knew about love. One moment, I was sorting through my late husband's belongings, still aching from loss. The next, I was staring at a crumpled bank receipt and a faded photograph of him smiling with another woman and a boy who wasn't mine. Her name was Leah Zhang. And that's when it hit me. The man I loved, the man I sacrificed everything for, never truly loved me back. I had always thought he was just quiet, that he wasn't good with words, that maybe love looked different on him. He didn't shower me with affection, but he provided. He was steady, and I clung to that, thinking it meant something. But those bank records told the real story. Every month, for years, half of his salary went to Leah. Not alone, not charity, support. For her. And for a child, I now realized was his. I stared at the paperwork, my hands shaking. There were photos, too, birthday parties, vacations, family moments I was never part of. My heart pounded like it was trying to break out of my chest. And just when I thought I couldn't be more devastated, I found the will. His final words. Cold, clear. Half of all assets to Leah Zhang and her son. Unconditionally. My name was mentioned. Briefly. An afterthought. I wasn't his love. I was his obligation. I didn't cry. Not at first. I just sat there, completely hollow. Everything we built, our home, our years, our quiet routines, none of it had meant what I thought it did. I had been the placeholder. The woman who kept his life together, while his heart lived somewhere else. I tried to breathe, but grief twisted into rage, and rage twisted into something deeper, something darker. Then came the knock at the door, and the final blow. Leah walked in like she owned the place. Her son followed, smug and silent. "We'll need to start sorting out the rooms," she said, her tone sharp. "The house is now half ours." I didn't even get a chance to speak. The walls closed in around me. My chest tightened. I reached for the edge of the table to steady myself, but my body gave out. Everything went white. My last thought was, I was never enough, not even in death. But life, or whatever comes after, had other plans for me. I opened my eyes, not in a hospital bed, but in my own bedroom, months earlier. My heart still pounding, but no pain, no funeral, no betrayal yet discovered. The sun poured in through the curtains like nothing had happened, except I remembered everything. The bank transfers, the will, Leah, her son, the look in her eyes as she claimed the home I once loved. I hadn't just come back, I had come back knowing. And this time, I wasn't going to be quiet. I wasn't going to sacrifice. I wasn't going to pretend that my husband's silence was love. I was going to dig, plan, and protect what was mine. Not because I needed revenge, but because I deserved truth. This wasn't a second chance at love. This was a second chance at me. He was still alive, still smiling that same reserved smile, still thanking me for dinner like I was a maid instead of a wife. I watched him closely now, every transaction, every late-night phone call, and slowly, piece by piece, I began collecting the proof. Quietly, carefully, not to confront him, not yet, but to build the foundation for the storm I was about to unleash. Because if Leah Zhang thought she could waltz into my life and take everything I had bled for, she was going to learn exactly who she was dealing with. I may have died once, but I came back with fire in my veins. And this time, I wouldn't fall. I'd rise. And I'd take everything with me. I began documenting everything, quietly, methodically, like a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to gain. His text messages, his vague excuses for late hours, the hush in his voice when he stepped onto the balcony to take certain calls. I checked his bank statements while he slept. The transfers to Leah were still there, hidden just under the surface. But now I was watching. Every deposit was another nail in the coffin of the lies I used to live under. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I smiled like I always had, cooked his favorite meals, kissed him goodnight, played the part he had written for me. But inside I was burning, not with blind rage, but with clarity. I wasn't going to scream and cry and beg him to love me. No, I was going to build my exit, one sharp step at a time. I had already died once. I wouldn't die again, just to make him comfortable. Leah, meanwhile, didn't know I was back. She was still playing the long game, calling him late at night, texting coded things like, "Thank you for always taking care of us." I printed everything. I kept a digital folder labeled closure. I wasn't just collecting proof. I was collecting freedom. Because the day I finally confronted them, I wanted there to be no escape, no denial, just truth, heavy and final. I went to a lawyer, one who specialized in marital fraud and asset protection. I told him everything. I didn't cry once. "You're preparing for war," he said quietly. I nodded. "Not war," I replied. "An awakening." We rewrote my will. I moved half the assets quietly into my name. I opened new accounts. And I started to build a life outside of his. Not one he could see, not yet, but one that didn't revolve around his silence or his secrets. Every day, I practiced the art of reclaiming myself. I stopped waiting up for him. I enrolled in an online course I'd once turned down to help him with his business. I changed my routine, my wardrobe, even my perfume. I wasn't trying to be someone new. I was finally letting myself be who I had always been, buried under sacrifice. Every moment I poured into myself was a crack in the cage he didn't even know he'd built around me. I kept the photo, the one of him with Leah and the boy. I looked at it often, not to torture myself, but to remind me why I could never go back to being blind. He had lived 2 lives, loved 2 families, and never once did he give me the choice to know the truth. That was the real betrayal, not the love he gave her, but the deception he fed me. For years, decades, while I gave him everything. The day of the confrontation came quietly. No storm, no screaming, just him coming home with his usual tired sigh, loosening his tie, asking what was for dinner. I stood in the kitchen, folder in hand, eyes steady. "We need to talk," I said. He looked up confused. And then he saw the folder, the printed receipts, the photo, the will. His color drained. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just said, "How long have you loved her?" And he couldn't answer, because we both knew the truth. He tried to explain that he felt obligated, that he never meant to hurt me, that it was just financial support. I let him talk, let him twist and scramble and reach. Then I laid out the documents, the transfers, the late-night texts, the business trips that weren't business at all. And finally I said, "You didn't just lie to me. You built a life on me, for her. And now I'm reclaiming every piece of it." He went pale, silent. For once, his quiet wasn't mysterious. It was guilty. And I felt nothing. Not pain. Not rage. Just peace. Cold, clear peace. I handed him the papers, the legal ones, the exit plan, my terms. I watched his hands tremble, and I realized he had never imagined this version of me, the one who wouldn't shatter, the one who came back from death not to beg, but to end it all on her terms. I left that night, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I didn't need his house. I had already built something stronger. Myself. I walked out with no drama. Just dignity. And as the door closed behind me, I whispered, "Let Leah have the ghost of you. I'm done sacrificing for a man who never saw me." That night, for the first time in years, I slept with both eyes closed and dreamed of nothing but light. I moved into a small apartment. Nothing extravagant, but it was mine. Every detail, every item, every corner held only my energy. No secrets, no shadows, just air I could finally breathe. I painted the walls with colors he would have hated, soft greens, earthy browns. I lit candles at night, cooked for myself, danced barefoot in the living room. There was no one to tell me I was too emotional, too needy, too much. And without his voice echoing around me, I finally began to hear my own. People noticed. My neighbors, my friends, even strangers. They'd say things like, "You seem lighter." And I was. Not because the pain was gone, but because I had stopped dragging it behind me. I wore my healing like quiet armor. I wasn't smiling to perform anymore. I was smiling because I had survived something that should have swallowed me whole. And that realization was more satisfying than any apology he could have ever offered. Leah tried to reach out. A text pretending it was all a misunderstanding. That she never asked for what he gave her. That she never meant to hurt me. I stared at the screen for a long time. And then, with a steady breath, I blocked her. Not out of spite, but out of self-respect. She had been a chapter in a book I had closed. I didn't need to rage at her. I had chosen peace. And peace meant letting go of anyone who benefited from my silence. I started journaling again. Long, rambling entries. Not just about him, but about me. The girl I used to be. The woman I was becoming. The small joys that felt like tiny miracles. Making my own schedule, walking in the rain without rushing home, reading until 2 a.m. because no one was waiting to be fed. Freedom didn't look like fireworks. It looked like simplicity, like solitude, like finally feeling at home in my own skin. The more I wrote, the more I healed. And then, almost accidentally, those words turned into something bigger. A blog, a following. Women reached out, saying, "This is my story too." I hadn't planned to inspire anyone. I was just trying to survive. But in telling my truth, I gave others permission to tell theirs. And in doing so, I found a new kind of love. Not romantic, not dramatic, but purposeful. And for once, I didn't feel like a ghost in my own life. He tried to come back, of course. They always do. A letter, handwritten, rambling about regret, confusion, how he'd been lost, that he missed my stability, that Leah had moved on, that he finally saw what he had. I didn't even finish reading it. Because that's the thing about men like him. They only see your value once they've lost access to it. I didn't need his guilt to validate my pain. I had already validated it myself. I kept the letter, though, not as a keepsake, but as proof. Proof that people can watch you give everything and still believe you owe them more. I tucked it into a folder labeled Past Life, sealed it, and shoved it in a drawer. That part of me wasn't erased, but it was over. I didn't need closure. I needed boundaries. And I had finally built some too high for him to climb. I changed my name, not legally, but spiritually. I no longer introduced myself as his anything, not his wife, not his mistake. I was just me, full, whole, no longer orbiting someone else's gravity. People would ask if I was dating again, and I'd laugh softly. "I'm dating myself right now," I'd say, and that wasn't sad. That was sacred. For the first time in my life, I was learning how to love someone who never betrayed me. Then came the speaking offer. A local women's shelter, had read my blog. They wanted me to talk, not about betrayal, but about rebuilding, about what comes after. I was terrified, but I went. I stood in front of 20 tired, beautiful faces and said, I died once, but now I wake up every day and choose to live. And they clapped, not because it was a performance, but because it was truth. That night, I cried, not from pain, but from pride. The kind of crying that cleanses you, that reminds you how far you've come. I wasn't crying for him, or Leah, or what I lost. I was crying for the girl who once believed she wasn't worthy of more. And I held her close inside me and whispered, we made it. He didn't break us. He only woke us up. I started running in the mornings, not to lose weight, not to impress anyone, just to feel my body move, to feel alive, the rhythm of my feet on the pavement, the cold air in my lungs. It became a ritual, a way to remind myself that I was still here, still standing, stronger than before. Every step was a quiet declaration. I survived. I'm healing. I'm free. He began to fade, not just from my phone or inbox, but from my memory. I stopped wondering where he was or who he was with. His name stopped echoing in my mind when I made tea or walked past our old places. That space inside me, where he once lived, grew quieter. And then, one day, I realized it was empty. And I didn't feel loss. I felt relief. The blog grew. Women from everywhere wrote in, each story a mirror of pain, sacrifice, and silent suffering. I wasn't just sharing my story anymore. I was holding space for others to rise. I wrote late into the night, fingers aching, heart full. I didn't need their validation, but their trust, that gave my pain a purpose. My wounds weren't weaknesses. They were a guidebook marked in ink and fire for the next woman climbing out of her own wreckage. I was asked to publish my writings as a book. I said yes, not for fame, but because words saved me. Maybe they could save someone else. I titled it, Quiet Wasn't Love. Just 3 words. But every one of them held the weight of the life I had left behind. The betrayal, the silence, the rising, and the absolute refusal to ever settle again. My face went on posters. Bookstores held readings. Women cried, hugged me, whispered, thank you. One night, at a signing, a woman handed me a copy with trembling hands and said, he left me 3 days ago. I didn't know what to do. Then I found you. I looked into her eyes and saw the woman I used to be. I took her hand and said, you're going to rise. And when you do, you won't recognize the version of yourself that stayed. I stopped waiting for someone to rescue me from loneliness. I made peace with it. I filled it with candles, music, journals, and long walks. And slowly, loneliness turned into solitude. Solitude turned into sanctuary. I didn't need someone next to me to feel complete. I had become my own home, my own haven. I had made friends with silence, because now it was mine, not his. I went back to our old house once, just to see. Leah didn't live there anymore. He didn't either. It had been sold, repainted, emptied of memory. I stood across the street, arms crossed, watching a new couple move in. They laughed, carried boxes, started their story, and I realized I had no sadness left for that place. It wasn't my home anymore. My real home was wherever I was now. One of his relatives emailed me, asking if I'd consider reconnecting. He's changed, they said. He misses you. I didn't reply. I didn't even feel anger, just distance. I had outgrown that entire world. They still lived in a reality where women were supposed to forgive quietly, rebuild quietly, and suffer quietly. But I was no longer that woman. My life was loud with freedom now. I started mentoring women who were rebuilding. Not just the legal stuff, but the emotional, invisible work. The way to reclaim a morning. The way to trust your reflection again. One woman said, "You don't sound angry at him anymore." And I smiled. "That's because I'm not." I told her, "Forgiveness doesn't mean he deserves peace. It means I do." She cried, and I understood exactly why. I wrote one last letter, not to him, but to the woman I used to be. "I'm sorry it took so long." I wrote, "I'm sorry no one told you he was never your home. But I promise you're safe now. You're seen. And we're never going back." I burned that letter at dawn, the flame small but steady. And as the smoke curled into the sky, I closed my eyes and whispered, "Goodbye." I bought a place by the sea. Nothing too big, just a quiet house with wide windows and open skies. I filled it with everything I used to push aside: soft blankets, plants that needed care, books stacked everywhere. There were no portraits of a man who lied. No shadows of the life I'd escaped. Just me, whole, calm. A woman who no longer needed to explain where she'd been, because where she was now said everything. Each morning, I'd stand on the balcony with my coffee and let the wind touch my face. It didn't ask anything of me. It just was. Like me. No performance. No pretending. I'd spent so many years being the good wife, the understanding woman, the sacrifice. But now, I wasn't anyone's extension. I was the story, the main character. And for once, I wasn't apologizing for the space I took up. My book hit bestseller lists. Not because it was trendy, but because it was honest, real, messy. It didn't offer neat endings. It offered truth. The truth that sometimes the person sleeping beside you is the one who broke you. That love isn't always loud, but silence isn't always safety. Readers told me I'd put words to things they couldn't name, that I'd helped them leave, that I gave them the courage to stop shrinking. And that was everything I ever needed. I was invited to speak at a women's summit. Hundreds of survivors, professionals, leaders. They called me a story of hope. I stood on that stage, looked into those eyes, and said, hope doesn't come after healing. It is the healing. Every step forward, every time you choose yourself, every time you say enough, that is hope. And when I finished, the applause didn't feel like noise. It felt like a hug from every woman who had ever stayed too long. He reached out again. A final letter. He said he saw me on TV. Said he didn't recognize the woman I'd become. Said he wished he'd loved me better. But that letter didn't sting. It didn't even linger. Because I finally understood. His regret was never going to fix what he broke. His regret belonged to him. And I had no interest in carrying it anymore. I took that letter, placed it in a folder labeled unreturned, and slid it away. I didn't need closure. I was already closed to him. He had been a season, and seasons end. Some with flowers, some with frost. Ours ended in silence, and I had filled that silence with stories, strength, and self-love. Let him miss me. Let him ache. That was never my job to fix. One afternoon, I met a man at a bookshop. Kind eyes. Slow smile. We talked about poetry. Nothing intense. Nothing electric. Just ease. He didn't try to impress me. He asked questions and listened. And when he learned about my past, he didn't flinch. He said, I'm not here to fix you. I'm here to witness your light, if you'll let me. And that was the first time I considered letting someone in, not to complete me, but to walk beside me. I didn't fall in love. I rose into it. Slowly, carefully, without fear. Because this time, I was rooted. I had already done the work. He wasn't my healing, he was the bonus. And even if it didn't last, I knew I'd never lose myself in someone else again. That was the promise I kept every day. I would never again give someone more of me than I gave to myself. I started a foundation called Second for women rising after silence. We offered support, legal help, therapy, writing workshops. I didn't want to just share my story. I wanted to create space for others to write theirs. Not everyone gets a second chance, but when they do, they need to know it's okay to take it, and that it's not selfish to save yourself. It's sacred. And every time I stood in a room full of women who had once been shattered and now stood tall, I felt it. Not victory, not revenge, rebirth. And it was louder than any apology, brighter than any love story, deeper than any silence I'd once mistaken for care. I didn't just survive what he did to me. I transformed because of it. And that was the story I was always meant to live. The foundation grew faster than I imagined. Women came not just to escape, but to rise, to rebuild, to remember who they were before the silence. We didn't just talk about survival, we talked about legacy, what we leave behind when we choose ourselves, what we inspire when we stop apologizing for our strength. The rooms we filled were loud with healing. It wasn't perfect, but it was powerful, and it was real. One day, a young woman asked me, "How did you know it was time to leave?" I smiled and said, "When staying started to cost me more than leaving ever could." She nodded slowly. I didn't give her advice. I gave her space, because no one told me when it was time. I had to die to finally understand it. I wanted her to know she didn't have to wait that long. On the anniversary of my husband's death, I didn't light a candle. I didn't visit his grave. I went to the ocean instead. I stood at the edge of the shore and whispered, "Thank you for nothing." And then I laughed, not with bitterness, but with relief. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't grieving anymore. I was finally done. That kind of peace doesn't shout. It settles, and it stays. I started writing a second book, not about heartbreak, but about rebirth, about how joy can feel foreign at first, how we flinch when someone's kind to us after so much cruelty, how healing is awkward and messy and worth it. It wasn't a sequel to pain. It was a love letter to the woman I had become. No one gave me permission to live this way. I claimed it, every soft, sacred inch of it. I started traveling again, alone, not to escape, but to explore, to meet myself in new places, in coffee shops, train stations, quiet mornings in strange cities. Every trip was a reminder. I am not lost anymore. I can go anywhere, be anything, and no matter where I land, I belong, because my home is no longer tied to someone else's love. My home is me. A woman I once mentored sent me a photo, her standing on her new porch, holding her daughter's hand, both of them smiling. "We made it," the caption read. I cried quietly when I saw it, not out of sadness, but because it meant the story didn't stop with me. It meant the fire I lit was lighting other paths. I hadn't just rewritten my ending. I had rewritten theirs too. One evening, I lit a candle for no reason at all, just to feel the glow. The room was quiet, soft jazz playing in the background, tea in hand. No chaos, no tension, just stillness. And in that stillness, I said aloud, I am no longer waiting for life to begin. Because it already had, and it was beautiful, not in a fairy tale kind of way, in a real way, a hard-earned, blood and ashes kind of beautiful. I looked back once, not to mourn, but to honor, that woman who stayed too long, who mistook silence for loyalty, who gave more than she had. She deserved better, and I gave it to her, not through a man, not through revenge, but through rebirth. She wasn't weak. She was just waiting for someone to choose her. And I did. Finally, I did. Now, when people ask me if I miss him, I say, no, not because I never loved him, but because I love me more. And that is a love story worth living for. Not the kind where someone else completes you, but the kind where you stop abandoning yourself for crumbs, where you feed your own fire, and you burn, bright, fearless, free. So here I am, no longer dead, no longer quiet, no longer his. I am my own. And every step I take forward is a promise to never go back. I was once the woman who sacrificed everything for a man who never loved her. Now I'm the woman who walked through death and chose herself.